Chapter 36, Part 3, and final part. I want you to stay here and tell the sheriff where we are and what our plan is in case he shows up before we get our trap set. Yes, sir. Anything else? The old man asked the men, as if he knew there wouldn't be any more questions. Then let's move out. Mark took the 4 men who were assigned to him and crossed the fence on the opposite side of the road from the house. Their assignment was to cross the field in front of the house, far enough away that the MZBs wouldn't detect them, and come back out onto the road on the far side of the house. Jim was crossing the fence on the house side and making his way behind the home with his men. Gunny had the oldest and slowest men with him. They would make their way down the road and complete the triangle. Mark and his men jogged slowly across the field. There wasn't much of a moon, and Mark didn't want any of his men falling and making noise or getting hurt. When they had reached the far side and were starting to recross the fence, Mark heard Jim radio that he was in position. Mark and his men, once across the fence, eased down into the deep ditch on the side of the road they had used to cross the field. They crept closer to the house until they were within 100 yards of the MZBs. From this distance, Mark could make out almost everything that was being said between the attackers and Ralph Jones. "You might as well come out, nigger. Sooner or later we're going to catch you anyway. If we have to, we'll burn you out." The voice was vaguely familiar to Mark. A shot came from the house. "Why don't you come try, you bastards? I got plenty of ammo, and I'm not going anywhere. You stick your head up and see what happens." A volley of shots came from the ditch. "Suit yourself, mud duck, but we have to smoke you out. It's going to be hard on you. Come on out and we'll do you quick. Then we'll let your women go. Otherwise, we'll make them scream while you watch." The only answer Ralph gave was 3 quick shots from his rifle. Mark whispered in the radio that he was ready. Gunny confirmed that he'd received the message and then asked Jim if he could see any MZBs on his side of the house. "Negative," Jim replied. "There's not really any cover back here. We're over 150 yards behind the house, and there are only 2 or 3 places where a man could hide." "All right, then. It looks like they're all in the ditch in front of the house. I'm going to tell them to surrender. If they start shooting, Mark and I will open up on them. If you still don't see anyone, move up behind the house and use it for cover. Then we'll have them in a 3-way crossfire." "Roger." Mark looked toward Gunny's position. He couldn't see the old man, but he could hear him. "You men attacking the house, you are totally surrounded by a superior force. Lay down your weapons and come out in the open with your hands on your heads. You will not be harmed if you..." Mark saw the muzzle flashes and then heard the answer from the MZBs. He pulled his rifle in tight to his shoulder, concentrating on the spot where he saw the first flash, and squeezed the trigger. The .308 bucked. He let it come back to level and repeated the process. After a few seconds, the firing from the MZBs had ceased, and a moment later, so did that from his and Gunny's positions. Mark couldn't believe how quiet it was. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. A voice shattered the silence. "Okay, we're coming out. Don't shoot." Mark saw one man rise up out of the ditch with his hands on top of his head. A second later, 2 more joined him, then 2 more, and finally another. Mark heard Gunny on the radio. "Jim, you and your men move up to cover these guys, then Mark and I will move up and secure them." "Roger, Gunny." Mark had a bad feeling. He hoped Ralph was all right, but that wasn't really what was bothering him. It was something else. He hated when he felt this way, and it had been happening too often lately, like the other night when... Mark keyed his radio. "Everybody, hold your position. Something's wrong." He moved the little Motorola from in front of his face and yelled toward the MZBs, "Ripper?" There was a long silence, then a voice called back, "How do you know my name?" Mark spoke quickly into the radio. "Gunny, there's another one somewhere." Gunny called to the 6 attackers. "Is that all of you?" Mark could see 6 heads swiveling back and forth. Finally, someone answered Gunny. "Yeah, this is all of us." Mark saw Gunny step out of the ditch and toward the men. He couldn't believe that Gunny thought about to lie. He was going to get himself killed if he didn't stop. Mark raised his radio back to his lips to try and talk some sense into the old man. Boom! Mark was startled by the shot and saw dirt spray up just in front of one of the MZBs. "You damn liars. You get to the count of 3 to tell me where the other one is, or I'm going to shoot one of you in the head. 1, 2... Mark recognized Ripper's voice. "He's in the ditch, crawling away." A voice came from a spot uncomfortably close to Mark. "Ripper, you asshole." Mark saw the hands come up out of the ditch across the road only 10 or 15 yards from him. I give up. Mark and 2 of his guys handled the crawler, who Mark realized was the leader from the other night, while everyone else patted down and disarmed the other 6. The former ranger looked at Mark and the radio in his hand. I heard you on the radio. How did you know there were 7 of us? You remember that big gate you stopped in front of the other night? The man nodded his head. I was on the other side. Damn, what do you figure the odds of that are? Does my luck suck or what? I guess it does, Mark agreed. Then he saw red and blue flashing lights. But it's improving. How do you figure? We're going to give you to the sheriff. How is that good luck? We could just let Mr. Jones take care of you, Mark half grinned. The look of hate in the younger man's eyes at the mention of Ralph's name was unmistakable. His jaw clenched shut, and Mark, somewhat surprised at the intensity of the hatred, had no desire to converse with him further. One of the arriving deputies handcuffed the attacker and herded him over to where the sheriff was. Mark followed. Ralph was explaining what had happened, with his wife beneath one arm and Trini under the other. Both of them were crying. Anyway, when they all went back around front, I had Trini run out the back and go get Mr. Turner. I knew he'd come help us. The big man looked from the sheriff to Mark. Mr. Turner, thank you so much. Now I owe you. Mark smiled at the bearer of a man. How about we just call it even? The big man just nodded his head. Ralph, besides the obvious, can you think any reason why these guys wanted to hurt you? The sheriff asked. Ralph's big paw came up and rubbed his chin. When I was a prosecutor for Bexar County, I put a lot of guys away, even some Klan guys. Other than that, I don't know. Well, I'll haul them to jail. Probably at least one of them will talk. I'll let you know. Then the sheriff turned to Mark. Mr. Turner, can I have a moment with you? Sure. Mark and the sheriff walked off a ways. You did a good thing here, Mark. I probably would have gotten here in time, but last night I was tied up on the far side of the county, and I don't think I would have made it. I feel better knowing you're here. Listen, Monday at 10 in the morning, I'm having a meeting at my office. Can you come? Sure I can. What's it about? Blah, blah. You'll see when you get there. Bring that old Marine sergeant with you and your friend Jim, too. Okay, Sheriff, we'll be there, Mark told the lawman as he walked back toward his squad car. The sheriff turned back toward Mark. If you don't mind, pick up Ralph, too. With that, he climbed into his car and left.